My worst series of death threats came from K-pop fans, just endless harassment and torrent from them.
Welcome to Crash, the tech podcast about everything else. Today, that means the oncoming jobpocalypse, or whether or not there is one, the oncoming end of encryption, and the oncoming AI nationalism battles between the US and China. I'm Alex Hudson.
And I am Chris Stokel-Walker. I'm not sure what I'm oncoming about, but we probably will not get into that.
You're interrupting this podcast to go and be a real journalist, and you are currently running agents in the background, and you're basically an autonomous media drone, and it's slightly frightening. Why are you doing so many things at once? And have you ever just done one thing at once?
No, because that's boring. That's incredibly boring. I maximize my life for efficiency, much to the chagrin of my fiance, who is like, no, I don't want to cook things in the most logical way. I want to just do things slowly and chaotically.
And she's still marrying you?
Yes, she's very patient. Very, very patient.
You made me laugh this week with your fight against feisty PR sending sassy responses. Tell me the whole story and tell me why it's somehow in the news.
So the story is basically, well, I can't tell you my story. I'm writing a story where he says he can't tell you that story, then he will start to tell you that story. PRs have a tendency to try and fight back a little bit against coverage and being annoying and argumentative, and that is A-okay for them to do so. That is their job. A journalist's job is also to be a little bit antagonistic towards PRs. But basically, there is this debate that is going on at the minute in the kind of MAGA movement in the United States, and also I think amongst a certain cadre of tech bros in the US, where they feel like it's really smart and intelligent to respond to valid requests for comment for stories by basically producing ad hominem attacks and believing that journalists have to reprint those in full. So they don't. Spoiler alert, particularly if it's not any way related to the story. And I had an issue where I had to approach a tech company because I'd caught them metaphorically with their trousers down, and their initial response was quite dismissive and like classic mainstream media lying again type thing. At which point I just replied and went, okay, well, I can use that. That's fine. And I'll quote that directly, but here's the evidence of what the issue is. And then about 20 minutes later, they came back with wasn't a groveling response, but it was a kind of actually proper and adult response rather than silly thing. So, fighting silliness with facts, I think, is a good way forwards for journalism.
I don't think necessarily that is the way forward. I think it's about rhetoric and storytelling and building out narratives that really create an emotion. I think you can prove anything with facts, as the media has shown time and time again, that actually the progressive view around messaging and narrative shift and telling the story, not the news, is actually as valid, despite the fact that every journalist is rightly obsessed with scoops and holding power to account. The problem is audiences aren't quite as enthusiastic as we are, which is annoying. The only other thing before we start is we had Taylor Lorenz on last week saying that ultimately loads of people in the US want to move to China, and there was a lot of people on the American left who were really keen on it, and the internet exploded. Turns out Taylor Lorenz has a point. Who knew? Like, there's literally thousands and thousands of comments arguing all sides of this argument, talking about how terrible America is, how great America is, how wonderful China is, how terrible China is, with lots of things that are incredibly complicated. And the only thing that I would like to draw out from that, so go back and listen, it's really interesting, bit of information, or check it out on any of our social networks. But the key thing is we've had literally 100,000 views across Instagram and on TikTok with exactly the same cell and exactly the same messaging and exactly the same video with a couple of tweaks, because you have to do it through the correct format. You have to use their proprietary software or else you get downgraded. Hate it. Has not been viewed at all. Could be a coincidence. Just going to leave that there. Anyway, we should probably move on to our main story. So the AI jobpocalypse, which is very difficult to say, is meant to change the nature of the workforce. The big tech CEOs all talk about AI as a civilization level event. It will change everything. So Microsoft AI's chief executive, Mustafa Suleyman, said, "We're going to have a human-level performance on most, if not all, professional tasks. So white-collar work, where you're sitting down at a computer, either being, a lawyer or an accountant or a project manager or a marketing person, most of those tasks will be fully automated by an AI within the next 12 to 18 months. That was last month, so we still got 17 months to go. Anthropic CEO Dario Modi said AI will wipe out half of all entry-level white-collar jobs in 5 years. So that was last year, so we have 4 years left. Ford CEO Jim Farley echoed that, but he just said in coming years. So maybe we have enough time to at least make some of our career. So 9 years ago, I interviewed the head of IBM Watson and wrote a deep piece about the forthcoming job apocalypse. So around 40% of jobs will be gone by 2030 in the US and 30% of jobs will go in the UK, I wrote. And so that in the next 15 years, so machines would be driving cars, replacing soldiers, work on the factory line, building components, providing comprehensive customer service and running financial securities, translating and interpreting text quicker than humans. And the list goes on and on and on. So you'd imagine that 9 years is a long time, but maybe not. The IMF said last year that about 40% of global employment is exposed to AI, and that's higher in advanced economies. And again, it's complicated. Drones already account for around 70% of casualties in the Russia-Ukraine war. Self-driving is very much possible, but not really legal except in very particular circumstances. Customer services, it's not AI, but it's mega automated. Translation is now predominantly automated. The biggest thing maybe there is that replaced is now exposed because work has been stable, capitalism is winning, and this has been the case throughout each industrial revolution. So maybe the biggest thing is that those people who work in media, work in tech, work in policy and use social media are all the ones that are impacted disproportionately. And that means that the story is very, very loud here than in previous times. So we're going to try to get to the bottom of whether stories of the AI job apocalypse are greatly exaggerated or actually there might be something in it. So Ellen Scott is our guest today. She's a journalist, editor, podcaster, writer. She's founder of Working on Purpose, a publication about employment, which you should follow on Substack, and a book of the same title. She was recently digital editor of Stylist. She was a lifestyle editor at Metro, where we were colleagues, and we were responsible, well, no, she was responsible for reinventing language around dating, coining submarining and sad fishing, which has its own Wikipedia page, which I didn't know until I was researching it, and probably a load of other words that I've since forgotten. She's one of the hardest working people I know, one of the best humans I know. Ellen, welcome to Crashed.
Thank you for having me. And I have to immediately correct and give proper credit for sad fishing. It was Rebecca Reed who came up with sad fishing, not me. She will obviously listen and appreciate that.
I had not seen Rebecca for a long time. Yeah, she's recited in the Wikipedia page. So, job apocalypse. It's such a human story that is all tech's fault. So how likely is the job apocalypse? What is the situation in workplaces already?
How much is it already happening? A lot. But maybe in terms of is the job apocalypse real or exaggerated, it's kind of both. Which is, I know, a confusing answer. I think that already you are seeing fewer entry-level roles. You are seeing people getting fired or made redundant because the bosses are going all in on AI. You're definitely seeing bosses talking about AI nonstop in a very annoying way. What I'm not seeing yet is the evidence that AI is doing such a great job that it can actually replace humans for as many tasks as maybe the AI bosses and creators are suggesting.
So there's a Gallup survey that says 19% of people use AI daily, 40% use frequently, and 66% use at all, which means that there's a whole third of the workforce not using it's not AI, LLMs at all. But if no one is using or few people are using it, why is there such a job apocalypse? I need to stop saying that word. I hate it. I hate that word so much. But why is there such this fear around it and what it's about to do to the job market?
Because, well, the fear is valid. Like, people are losing their jobs and there are fewer entry-level jobs. It's an absolutely valid fear. I think the idea of some people aren't using it, a lot of people are, like a shit ton are. And also a lot of people who are using it are people in power and in charge of hiring decisions. And like I said that bosses keep being annoying about it. They do, because they're going, we're all in on this. It's cheaper than hiring humans. Let's use AI as much as possible. It's going to be amazing. It's going to do all these things. So if the bosses are thinking that way, that is something to be scared of. Yeah, it makes complete sense to be worried. I also think that the kind of divide of people going, not using it at all or using it every day, I think is a good representation of the public perception of AI. I interact with people most days about work, and the number one thing they ask me about is AI. And either they will say, I don't use it all, I hate it, I'm scared of it. Or they'll be like, I use it for everything. I used it this morning to like figure out how to make a cup of tea. And
Who are you
the thing,
speaking to that needs the AI for tea?
I am exaggerating. To be fair, I'm just saying that they do use it for stuff that's like, you could just figure it out. Like, it's fine to get things wrong. I get very irritated by that. But my point is that I think with those two extremes, they're quite set. Like, I think it's going to be quite difficult to get the people that never use it and hate it over to the other side, or people that use it every day to go back to being a bit more suspicious of AI. As much as they're going, okay, this percentage of people isn't using it, the people who are really using it are going to have a massive impact on the job market and jobs in general. So they'll affect the ones that aren't using it.
So what's the consequence of that, Ellen? If those holdouts remain holdouts, those adherents continue to use this full bore, do we just kind of like see a massive bifurcation in how society works, where you've got like, I don't know, people lagging behind incredibly and people streaking ahead way more?
Yeah, 100%. I've already seen people saying, oh, my workplace has this whole AI policy. They're really encouraging of me using AI. And when I push back on that, I'm penalized. Like, I'm judged as being, rebellious, a troublemaker, like not going with the program. I think that you will see people being pushed out or told you can't progress to a certain level unless you're using AI. There's already this narrative that I hear at every AI conference workshop where they're like, AI won't take your job, but someone who knows how to use AI will. And that's very much the narrative that they want to push. It's like, you need to get with the program, otherwise you are not safe. You are going to lose your job. And that, again, is true, because if all the bosses are very into and pro AI, they're not going to be keen to keep or hire people who are anti-AI.
Are all the bosses? So PwC did a report that said over half of chief executives saw no benefits with the deployment of AI tools. Again, we're going to try and do a nuanced, tricky sort of in-between take of actually trying to get to the facts of it, because it feels like the reason that there are no jobs is because we've flatlined the economy we keep flatlining the economy continually, and there is a sort of growth stagnation, a productivity stagnation, particularly in the UK, partly caused by Brexit, partly caused by all manner of different socioeconomic things, and AI is merely this, in certain contexts, is a scapegoat. So in the US, the economy grew by 4% at the same time that the workforce grew by 0. Very little percent. And so once again, that's not necessarily a good thing that the economy grows without the workforce growing. But it feels like AI doesn't work yet, despite Chris assuring me that agents are going to work. They're not.
It
They
absolutely
won't.
works.
They won't. They're not going to work.
It works
There'll be
currently and is working for me. But anyway, that's by the by.
Really? What is it doing?
All sorts. So it filters through the fire hose of information that allows me to more quickly understand what stories I need to report on every single day. It can help me find interviewees, all sorts of stuff that is kind of directly relevant to my job. But we can talk about that after you ask the question of Ellen.
It feels so. If it's economy stagnation, it's that we're feeling this rut. And it feels more that AI is being used in the way that we blame social media for destroying journalism, and it wasn't really social media's fault. It was mainly the media industry's fault. Is that situation actually AI, or is it more just we're in this weird middle manager crisis where no one's quite sure what the future holds? And I'm speaking too long now, but you understand the question of like, actually, how much is AI just being used for fundamental misunderstandings of a 21st century labour market?
It's both. Both things are true. AI is responsible for a lot of things, but also a lot of the time it is just bosses and managers not understanding why work isn't working and going, okay, the solution is AI, and buying into that and then using that as quite a convenient excuse to get rid of people, increase workload on the flip side, just loads of stuff. So AI is changing the job market, but also it is a handy excuse for the changes that are happening. It's both things.
It works both ways, right? So it's both things that's kind of being used as an excuse, but at the same time also, is there a a kind of way in which we need to grasp the nettle with both hands here and go, actually, the economy isn't working, the job market isn't working as is, and AI is kind of exacerbating that. Like, what do we do about that? What Keir Starmer talks about, kind of AI changing everything, and they're talking this week, I think, about putting loads of money into this and making us an AI superpower yet again. Like, how should governments be thinking about this, given that it's their job as well as business owners and everyday workers?
I am not a knowledgeable person about this, so please forgive me when I inevitably say like really naive things. But in my dream world, the governments would go, okay, what society do we want to create? And how can we incentivize those behaviors correctly? And I think with work specifically, I talk a lot in the book and the newsletter about this. I would like us to get to a point where bosses are not just bosses for capitalistic gain and profit, but because they're going, I have a moral responsibility to provide other human beings with enjoyable and purposeful work, because I recognize that people are better when they have work that they actually enjoy, right? So if the government were to get on board with that bit, which in theory they kind of are, because they keep saying unemployment bad, benefits bad, etc., they would need to incentivize hiring people rather than outsourcing to AI. So at the moment, there's a lot of talk in the work world about raising the taxes on hiring and recruitment. So of course that's going to make people go, oh, I can't be bothered to go through that faff or pay more to get people into jobs when I can, for cheaper, get AI, which is also being sold to me as this is better than humans. There's no benefit for bosses to continue to hire and invest in humans at the moment, particularly entry-level humans. And if we as a society and governments and people in power want that to be different, we need to reward the behaviors that get us to that point. That's just a fact. And we also, as you say, like, I think I actually haven't heard the term grasp the nettle before, and I like it. I think we need to face up to what's happening. I think the ignorance of this massive growing issue and refusal to engage in it is stupid. But equally, I think the whole immediate full face turning to AI and being like, this is everything, is also really short-sighted and silly. Like, there's so much else that's going on in the work world.
Chris, let me try and sort of bumble around and sort of the political reality of it. So because now the Overton window, so the Overton window is the sort of level of acceptable political discourse and the range within the sort of levels it is. And on one side, you've got the sort of populist right and the remigration thing on one side. But actually, as the Overton window broadens because of the fragmentation of the media and fragmentation of this political narratives, and there isn't one thing, actually on the left, the universal basic income is starting to enter the Overton window and it is having that conversation. And despite it being politically impractical and financially improbable, the fact that that is even in that conversation shows actually we're heading towards where something has to give, whether that be either the safety net is increased to a level where it's actually a true safety net, and then people are the work is a choice, and then you get more passionate, and then workplaces are forced to bring people in for a reason, so whether that be holistically or financially or emotionally, that changes the entire workforce, that changes things, that brings people through. And the second thing is, if you do not invest in training of people as a capitalist business, you're screwed. And this AI gap is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's actually not someone who knows how AI works. It's someone who knows how to adapt. And given that the AI models of 12 months ago and then now are wholly different to the ones that will be in another 12 months, actually is the people and go, okay, I'll try this. Okay, let's experiment. Okay, let's mess around. And that is the currency alongside, the bloody storytellers that are getting paid $500,000 to write LinkedIn posts for CEOs, which blows my mind. But it's all in the sort of adaptability and innovation. So I think that's practicality politically. I don't know, particularly in this sort of westernized, late stage neo-capitalist world who blinks first on UBI, because you can see already some of the Nordic states are moving towards it, and that there is that moment there. I just think in this polarized populist bit of politics that we're in, I don't know how that plays. It's a very long-winded way of saying, Chris, I've got no idea, to be honest. There is no hope. Everything is doomed. But it's complicated. It's very complicated. I don't know what the solution is. With work, you're going to get 1,000 people applying for every one job. And so that's the real practicality of what we're already seeing, is that there is no sharp rise in unemployment. There is a sort of significant rise, but it's not sharp to the extent that the Microsoft AI guy says it might be. And people don't know how to use AI because it's still for most people, unless you have the unbelievable galaxy brain that Chris has, most people can't use it to the extent that you do. And so you've got that gap between, there'll be that lucky few, and it depends how capitalism lets it sort of shake out as to whether or not actually there is true benefit to being the canary in the coal mine and innovating in this space, or there's this sort of Apple second mouse principle, where the first mouse gets cracked by the mousetrap, but the second mouse gets all the cheese. Which is a horrible metaphor. What happens there? If Chris, you become the billionaire and everyone else is left sort of picking up crumbs.
All right for me, Gov. As you say, the number of people who apply for jobs is just crazy now. And you hear about recruiters kind of just being swamped with this stuff. Actually, I was talking to an editor in our world last night who said that she had set up a new magazine and was expecting around about 100 pictures from various freelancers, and she had 500. And so now she's like full up for the next 9 months.
So it's the same thing with that actually all of them are scary good. In times gone by, we would get 300 pictures of everything, and maybe like 5 would be excellent and a few would be great. Like most recent times, 300 and like 150 people were like incredible. It's slightly frightening how good people have got. That could be AI's fault also.
I similarly was getting thousands of pictures, and it would drive me absolutely mad how many of them were complete crap, but also how many of them were clearly sent out and written by AI. I got a lot of pictures from that fake woman that Press Gazette wrote about, Victoria Goldie, who doesn't exist. Mind-boggling. But
explain that story for those who haven't seen it. Explain.
Basically, there was this journalist that Press Gazette and similar people think is not a real person. They were pitching loads of first-person pieces about loads this woman seemed to have had all the experiences in the world. She also was very good at turning around to very tight deadlines, like suspiciously good. So I had a few pictures from her, but also I've had a lot of pictures from real people, but they're clearly AI generating the pictures, or etc. Like I worked at Stylist magazine, and the number of emails I got being like, I'm applying for a job as a stylist. It's a waste of everyone's time. Then you've got on the other side of recruitment and receiving pitches, that's then using AI. So you're just AI talking to each other. It's so frustrating. Not to go on a rant about this, but it is maddening.
No, and as someone who has tried using AI to see whether or not it can do decent pitches, like it can't at all. Like I'm trying to run something right now. I got a new computer that I'm trying to run a local LLM on this week just to see what I can do with that. And the pitch that I'm looking at that it's tried to generate from this dashboard that I've created is rubbish. Like it's just completely rubbish. And I think that's what's really fascinating about like how there are elements of this that are still important and kind of demonstrating that human nature. I mean, there was always bad pictures. I edited a short form video publication for a short time, and it was an eye-opening experience to understand what editors face on the other side of things. And it made me appreciate that actually like my magic power is just to be not terrible, to be like a 6 out of 10.
That is a shit superhero movie.
Oh, well, as we were talking about Tom Cruise before we started recording, we probably should not go any further.
He's not a superhero. He's just Mission Impossible man. Is he ever?
He's a superhero in my mind. Let's put it this way, Alex. He does his own stunts, therefore he is a superhero. But I mean, that's the journalism context. But in terms of the job seeking context, because there'll be listeners who are AI curious here. We are Crashed. We have a kind of tech forward focused user base, or user base is a horrible word, listener base. But then there will probably also be some people who are just like, they don't use it day in, day out. They really don't like it. They'll be thinking probably pretty disheartened about where they fit in this job market. Like, how do you cut through those 500 AI generated job applications and the morass that you have to demonstrate that you are still human if you don't want to play that game of just AI talking to AI?
I think realistically, it is taking the time and doing a proper cover letter and resume, as like lame as that sounds. That is what makes a difference. While a lot of recruitment and hiring managers are using AI, a lot of them are using AI and then going, well, this is shit, and then just going back and redoing the job themselves. Like I haven't had any good experience with AI CV screening. Like it's just useless. So I think that as much as people are using that to rifle through things quickly, when you send a good job application, know that like there probably will be someone that will see it and go, I'm going to stop here and actually read this one. That's reassuring. And I hope that continues. I think that the conversation around the direness of the recruitment process in general right now is causing people, especially hiring managers, to go, actually, we need to change this because it's not good for anyone. Like, no one wants to have to go through, 700 applications for one job in a week when they've also got all their other work to do. So I hope that things will change. But I think for now, it's, even if you use AI and then go back and humanize your cover letter, your email, everything, humanize it so that you just cut through the slop.
I'm going to add one bit of advice that, having read some recent cover letters, and that would be read the thing through. If you're using AI, read the thing through, because there was one that just had a little paragraph that just said, "Okay, great, that's really great. Do you want me to add that bit here?"
Yes.
Added with Claude. I was like, well,
remove
Claude.
the prompt. Like, remove that. That was the thing that drove me mad. I had articles submitted that had that as well, and I was like, come on, just scan over it. It drives me absolutely insane.
So then a final question to round us all off. Are stories of the AI job apocalypse greatly exaggerated, or are we on the brink of a job apocalypse? After saying I wouldn't say it, I said that word twice.
For the next couple of years, it's going to be bad. It's going to be bad times for jobs and work in general, but I think that it won't be a job apocalypse, I hope. I also think that we're going through a tricky middle teenagehood of work culture and the way that work is changing. I think in maybe 10 years, we might come out the other side and work will be amazing and work will be what it should be, and AI will be used in the way it should be, which is getting rid of the drudgery and boring bits of work to enable us to do things that are engaging and fulfilling. But I think for the next few years, yeah, it's going to suck. Like, recruitment's going to be bad. The AI discourse is going to be terrible. Bosses are going to continue to be irritating about AI use. Yeah. So it's going to suck. I wouldn't say job apocalypse because that sounds like really doomsday, but it will suck.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think that's going to be a very trying time. The challenge is that with a lot of the conversations around the impact that AI is having on the job market are misunderstanding the language that's being used because it is imprecise. So, for instance, if we look at the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, they're saying that 40% of jobs worldwide will be affected in some way by AI, and the majority of those will be white-collar jobs in the Western world. That affected word is really important. Affected does not mean necessarily lost. It means that maybe half the time you're using AI rather than using something else. Maybe it means that if you are a software developer, you're not writing the code yourself. You are overseeing in some way an AI agent that is writing the code and actually going in, finding the problems, fixing it, and kind of acting almost as a mentor to that system to encourage it to kind of not make the same mistakes again. Maybe you're doing something else. Affected is the key word. I think that it's not a case of we should all throw in the towel, because it's not. In fact, this is a moment at which you need to be getting closer to AI, I would argue, actually. And knowing, even if you don't want to use it day in, day out, just knowing where its strengths and its weaknesses lie in an honest way, not like second-hand or third-hand gossip, because ultimately it is, I think, something that is here to stay, perhaps not at the extent or the level that Sam Altman and Dario Amodei talk about, but it is going to be involved in your workforce. Better to know the enemy rather than to just kind of ignore it.
Everything is doomed. Anyway, Ellen, where can everybody find you and where should people be looking you up?
You can look me up on all socials at Ellen C. Scott. Then Working on Purpose is my newsletter on Substack and LinkedIn. And I also have a personal newsletter called Guess I'll Die, also on Substack.
I am a subscriber to all of those things. And yes, they are
Excellent.
beautiful, wonderful, and charming and challenging and interesting and makes my brain hurt sometimes. But Ellen, thank you so much for coming on and giving your expertise.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll be back in 1 second. Welcome back to the second part of Crashed. So we're going to try do one of the most complicated stories we've ever tried to do in 15 minutes or less. So it's not going to work. We're going to run long, but we'll see where we end up. We're dedicating this section to showing how little technology has changed. So it's Microsoft versus Amazon, and it's the US versus China, just on new battlefront. So Microsoft is considering legal action over an Amazon OpenAI cloud deal because it may breach Microsoft's exclusive cloud arrangements with OpenAI. So this is the FT report. So the details of the deal is incredibly detailed, and my God, it's boring. But it boils down to whether Microsoft's exclusive deal with OpenAI and its part ownership of the AI company amounts to much or anything, and whether it's really worth the paper it's written on. So following a 2025 restructuring, which we covered on Crash, so go back and listen if you want to learn about that. Microsoft owns approximately 27% of OpenAI Group, PBC. Again, what that means, dull, don't worry. Microsoft's stake is valued at around $135 billion, according to Microsoft's own estimates, and they remain the exclusive cloud partner, holding rights to OpenAI's intellectual property and models through 2032. Until this moment, basically. It's a battle of who owns the pipes, which is a tale as old as time. So Mac v PC, Nintendo versus Sega, AOL versus Netscape, then Mac versus PC again, continuing. The story is no longer who has the best model, but who controls the contracts, who controls the enterprise stack and distribution. So the partnership that defined the first AI boom between Microsoft and OpenAI is now looking like a custody battle for their children. So that's the first part of this incredibly complicated question. Let's come on to the second bit in a bit. What is going on, and why is OpenAI cheating on Microsoft?
Because OpenAI is an interesting company, right? That sees that AI is hot stuff and realizes that it can make a lot of money and build a lot of partnerships as a result of that. It comes down to the fundamental difference between Sam Altman and other CEOs of AI companies in the way in which they decide to try and lead because of the way that their brains are wired. And Sam Altman is a wheeler dealer. Like, he knows how to do business incredibly well, but sometimes it comes back to bite him and annoys, I think, those partners that were bought into the idea of what OpenAI was doing early doors. I think that particularly galling for Microsoft is that idea that actually, like, they were there and a trusted partner long before everybody else, back when this was kind of not a sketchy deal, but a difficult deal to sell to a big company. They stuck by OpenAI through that big CEO departure and then return phase. Remember, it was Satya Nadella basically saying, we trust in Sam and we think that OpenAI will be fine. That kind of helped build the momentum against that boardroom coup. No wonder that they're scorned at the minute, because they've stuck by him through thick and thin.
Is this a position of strength or is this a position of weakness? So there are those arguments that actually AI becomes this monopolistic or at least oligopolistic thing where a few companies own the rights to or own the models that do the best, and they really make huge multi at some point trillion dollar companies. And the other argument is that the AI and LLMs particularly are a commodity, therefore the brand names around them, because it's so closely linked, are fundamentally value less. So is there one side of that debate that this sort of deal comes down on sort of further adding evidence to?
I think you're right in the sense of OpenAI is in a point of weakness if you believe what Microsoft say. And I mean, one of the things that we have to bear in mind is this is currently being litigated through the media and through this one story from the FT. The FT, though, usually is incredibly well sourced and incredibly good on these sorts
The
of
FT
things.
on OpenAI, recent times, they've broken so many scoops around this issue.
Yeah, well, it's Madhu Mita in London, it's Christina Criddle in the US, and the colleagues there, and like Madhu and Christina are like the best of the best in UK tech journalism. Like nobody is better than them on that, and so like what they say, like gold effectively. But what's interesting is, they're quoting, and they put really high up in the story a person familiar with Microsoft's position. Now, those of you who are tapped into the media landscape will know exactly what that means. Alex, do you want to maybe try and explain what a person familiar actually means there?
It depends. It depends widely, and it can mean a number of different things depending on the context. But what it generally means is it's Satya Nadella. It's somebody very high up Microsoft who is very, very, very familiar with the matter, though they do not want to appear on the record, and they are quoting on background, and they're the ones that are leading the story, though in this case, we would never want to speculate, because the reason it's reported as familiar with the matter is that it's on background. And so generally, though, good journalists will only ever take that if it is absolute truth, or at least absolutely an accurate representation of one side of that argument. Did they get close? Did they get full marks?
Yeah, I think he did. Well, you always get full marks in my mind, Alex, always. But that person familiar with Microsoft's position was really declarative. Yeah, they are quoted as saying, "We know our contract. We will sue them if they breach it." If Amazon and OpenAI want to take a bet on the creativity of their contractual lawyers, I would back us, not them. That is strong. That serves two purposes. Number one, it suggests that Microsoft feel incredibly strong in their position. They've checked through the fine print. They know that they are in the right here. And number two, it suggests that they are incredibly pissed off at this.
Well, if you own 27% of the company, you would imagine, and again, like business is business, particularly in the US, it feels like you should at least have some say in who you do and do not go into partnership with. And you would imagine one of your biggest competitors, who haven't really been at the front line of the AI race yet, taking on that burden, opportunity, pick your language carefully, feels like an affront to just everything around Microsoft's business model.
Yeah, and I think it is. And I think it's doubly worse for the fact that it's what is a highly lucrative part of their business, which is the cloud computing, cloud hosting, service providing aspect, which is going to become ever more important in this world of agentic AI that I know that you refuse to engage with and think is coming around the corner.
Until it takes over your server and starts deleting emails. Again, It nearly works. It doesn't quite.
Until it does that, and we've talked about that in the past. Then
I'm meant to be so future game. I'm meant to be so impassionately pro progress and pro this wonderful new tech revolution, and it's just like it's all the old adage of it's a time machine would be great if it worked, but it doesn't. Agentic AI would be great if it works, but it doesn't. Same thing.
Well, the problem with that, and we're getting on a hell of a tangent now, but that's okay. That is literally what our podcast is, and that is why people listen to us, is that the problem is that agentic AI's whole purpose is that it is meant to be user-friendly, and it is at that stage where it's a bit buggy and a little bit difficult, and the direction of travel is there, and they're kind of like half to 3/4 of the way down the road to the point where it will be possible, but it's not quite yet. And there are some people who don't have the technical nous and don't have the kind of like awareness that things can go catastrophically wrong to use it in a way that can make it go catastrophically wrong. And so therefore that's a massive disincentive to ever use it again.
Then let's move on to the second part of this story, because we said we were going to do it in 15 minutes. That's going to not, no chance. That whole story, the sort of Amazon v Microsoft, it feels really kind of old school proper tech battle. And this is directly linked to sort of NVIDIA announcing that it's restarting manufacture of one of its chips that was embroiled in increasing regulatory hurdles in both the US and China. It's a good old battle of East versus West, tale as old as times. According to Reuters, the China chip sales are not included in the forecast. More than $1 trillion in revenue that's been forecast by the end of 2027. And the battle for AI's future is one that we've covered on Crash before and we'll cover again. In the first part of this section, we're talking about the sort of company v company, who wins, Amazon or Microsoft. And the second part of this is who wins. Is it the US or is it China? Or is it a third nation? Well, the UK really wants it to be, as we've talked about many times. But it feels like we're past the preliminary rounds and it's really turning into a fully open fist fight. Chris, who's winning the fist fight?
Depends on what day of the week it is, to be completely honest with you. At the minute, I think the US still is. That is likely to change if that chip export agreement does go ahead. So Jensen Huang announced on stage that this China deal was back on, which is big news and massive and important, as Alex, you've explained, because of the kind of scale of the opportunity of returns for the firm financially. But it all depends on Donald Trump saying yes, definitely, and sticking with saying yes. What I found really interesting, and this is kind of like the beautiful happenstance of journalism, is that there was a reporter who had heard that on stage, asked a question about it, and then Jensen Huang had announced it and said, like, we're able to do this, but hadn't fully confirmed that both the US and China were on board with this. That reporter then, she went to the toilet, she came out from the toilet and just happened to see Jensen Huang with all of his entourage in tow passing by. Jensen said to her, "Did I answer your question all right?" And she said yes. And then she said, "But I did have one more. When you said this, did you mean that both the US and Chinese governments have agreed to it?" And he confirmed yes. And so that suddenly became a scoop for her in that sense. So it's a beauty of journalism where you happen upon stories as you leave the toilets at the sidelines of conferences. But yeah, until I think Donald Trump goes back on that, the calculus, the power is shifting a little bit more back in the way of China, because they have the pace of development of models, and also they now have access to some of those chips that will help them.
Then why? I think I think that eventually, whomever is the most aggressive and the most loose with the sort of morality and ethics of the business of this will probably, likely, as 'twas ever thus, end up being successful in this, because ethics only get you so far, which is miserable and sad, and we should recognize that is not a good thing, but it is the reality of where we've had previous industrial revolutions. And then I think the tricky thing is, I can't pick, if we're looking for ethical business, as as we talked about with Taylor Friends last week, do you want China's ethical business, or do you want US ethical business? Because if you actually try and make at least a nod towards ethical business, you're then the EU, and the EU is not winning this race, and no companies are staying there. So who is going to be more cutthroat? Who is going to be more willing to move fast and break things? And who is willing to push stuff out into market even if it's not quite ready yet or safe yet? And it feels like, at least from recent deploys, that China is that country, and China is the sort of infrastructure that does allow that. And I think this stage of the power moving from west to east, which is already underway, slightly stalled by the sort of shrinking or confusing bits of population growth or lack of population growth, and no one knows where that goes next. That's a whole episode by itself. I don't know what gives, and surely somebody has to come in and regulate this thing before it becomes just an open fist fight of AI versus AI, government versus government, and it moves from potentially a Cold War or a sort of AI tech war into something that becomes geopolitically a serious, even more serious business than it is already.
Who's going to regulate? Because you've got Xi Jinping on one side and you've got Donald Trump on the other, both leaders of superpowers, both brook no any at all opposition. They both think that they are leading the world's dominant country. You don't have a regulator that sits on top of them, right? And everybody else doesn't matter. Like, we've seen this with the military application of AI, with the war in the Middle East, deeply unsettling for a lot of world leaders, deeply unsettling for a lot of business leaders. We can shout and complain about it all we want. Donald Trump is going to do what Donald Trump wants to do. And I think what's interesting is, I agree with you 100% about the idea that China is potentially slightly more lax on this. It's actually fascinating hearing you talk about that, because you basically almost word for word dictated a pitch that I wrote, and we'll be writing a story for Fast Company that will go up by the end of the month on the race between China and the US in terms of the moral rights and the kind of like the safety aspect. So, in the last week also, we've seen China approving the first world's commercial BCI interface that is intrusive in the brain. So BCI is brain-computer interface. It's the stuff that you've seen probably Elon Musk dabbling with in terms of Neuralink, but they kind of are going gung-ho with this and saying, actually, we will roll this out through the medical sort of sector. My concern is that in a sort of US led by Donald Trump, where he is much more focused on the business and the competition and wanting to beat China, that maybe you start to see some elements of kind of cutting corners in an attempt to try and keep up with this sort of stuff.
So I think there are 2 points. First point is, now we're over 20 episodes in, we just now think the same, and we only talk the same. We have the same notes about all of these things. The scary reality of that ever becoming true would be terrifying. And I've entirely forgotten what the second point is. Oh,
Okay.
yes, hold on. I know what the second question was. Have you seen, so this is related to NVIDIA. Have you seen the DLS 5.5 or whatever it's called, this new magical AI graphics processing that's set to just blow up all gaming forever?
So I have not seen it, but I have had my AI agentic news team summarize it for me. So my understanding is that it basically irons out all of the cool wrinkles and opportunities that you can have as graphics teams in games, right? To have some unique elements.
It sort of irons out the wrinkles by adding wrinkles. So it's a sort of false positive. So it makes things moving from the sort of smooth-skinned avatars and game characters that we've seen before to photorealistic. It's the next, feels like, again, I've only seen a demo. I have not seen it in action, not seen it in live environments. It feels like the demo is scary. We've always been moving towards, here's you just watching TV and this is now an interactive computer game. Again, I think the timing of it and the timing of GTA, I'm obsessed. I think that GTA 6 is such a defining moment in the future of gaming, with the engagement of AI, with the engagement of graphics processing. I think there is a reason that GTA is being held and held and held and held, and I think this level of AI could be the thing that pushes it through. It looks frightening and it looks cool, and then all of the sort of naysayers are saying, actually, this is scary and it's removing the human element of it, or the sort of coding, the difficulty in the art direction of it. But ultimately, it looks like it is going to, and already is, really changing the way that gaming looks. And that's fun.
Yeah, I mean, fun in a way, but also I don't want everything to look the same. I don't want everything to look lifelike. I mean, there was a bunch of different games that I used to like. There was a PlayStation 2 game called Oni, which was a kind of action shooter, which had a very unique art style that I thought was quite good. Similarly, Katamari Damacy, which was an old school video game. I mean, old school, like 2010s video game, which had, again, a unique art style. My worry is that if that is handed off to basically just run this through the NVIDIA thing, you lose the kind of the nice, interesting elements that actually make games unique.
I don't think that was the same as the greatest video game of all time, which everyone can agree is Grim Fandango. Well, no, obviously, greatest actual video game is the most recent Legend of Zelda. But apart from that, the most important game, Grim Fandango, and the remastered version of that came out for Switch and for iPhone and phones, just stepped it up and made it this beautiful thing. But there's no possibility of Day of the Dead characters looking realistic. So I think it just surely offers people more opportunity to be creative rather than making everything look lifelike. It just means that everything feels like it allows you to do what you want with it. So the thing that is in your mind now is on screen rather than it looking like a sort of pared back version of what you thought it might be. And now we have spoken, we said we're going to do it in 15. We haven't. We did it nearly in 15 minutes, but then we went off on tangents. So we'll be back in 1 second with the final questions to which there are no answer. Welcome back to the final part of Crashed, where we will ask questions to which there are no answers. So, why is Instagram removing... Actually, maybe there is an answer to this, but I couldn't think of one. Why is Instagram removing the encryption to its messaging? Is encryption going to die?
But no, I mean, encryption isn't going to die because Signal exists. So there is an answer to that. But I do think that it is interesting that Meta is going away from this. So for those who haven't been following, Meta is getting rid of end-to-end encryption on Instagram DMs. They argued that it was a really underutilized feature. I think a minute proportion of users ever ended up using it. It wasn't turned on by default, unlike with WhatsApp, where it is. Is this an attempt to try and make it easier for them to be able to identify potential targets for advertising? Because obviously it's an ads-based business. Third-party cookies no longer exist, so first-party data is supreme on this, and when you have encryption, it becomes incredibly difficult to do that. I don't think that's particularly likely. Ditto, there is the argument that this is because you have a broader international movement to try and protect children online, and in order to do that, you need to be able to try and estimate their age and things like that. One way that people might disclose stuff is through DMs or being able to infer the age of an individual through that sort of stuff. Again, I'm skeptical. I suppose the reality is that there is no answer unless you live in Meta and operate in Meta and work within Meta to why they are doing this.
We all know how much they love speaking to the media openly and on the record. You can't shut them up. You just ring them up and they're so willing to talk to you. They get back to your emails within seconds with really long, reasoned responses.
Definitely.
It's amazing.
Okay. My question for you then is, what would it take for you to threaten somebody's life in the world of tech?
What? I am so far away from this story. I have no idea what you're talking about. Go.
So
what are you talking about?
Polymarket gamblers, okay? The prediction markets where you are able to stake bets on the outcome of events, initially around sports, but increasingly around all sorts of stuff, including
like war in Iran.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, so there is. It's not funny, but it is, and it is kind of funny if you are not the person who is being threatened with your life. A journalist who reported on a missile strike near Jerusalem is basically getting hate mail, and that's no new thing for journalists to get hate mail for a report that they did. But they're getting death threats. That's also no new thing. My worst series of death threats came from K-pop fans. Just endless harassment and torrent from them. That's a whole other episode, potentially. Because he had reported that this missile strike had happened, and there were people who had bet on the opposite side of this happening. And they were on the hook for potentially millions of dollars collectively. So they basically said, you need to change your reporting. If you decide not to correct it, some users said, and leave the lie intact, you'll discover enemies who will be willing to pay anything to make your life miserable. So this is the grim reality of living and working in 2026 as a journalist these days.
So I think that's not about journalism at all. That's about Polymarket, and I think we haven't talked about Polymarket at all, have we? So I think there is so much about if you believe in free markets, and then the US was insulated from a lot of the online betting because of the quite restrictive laws that were taking place there. And again, that's another detailed conversation, because it's one part, the in real life gambling industry set to protect its monopoly across all of these areas. And the gambling regulations in the US is incredibly unfederalized and state by state by state by state. It's very complicated. And so now it's out, and now that Polymarket is essentially doing the coldest, most amoral version of what gambling can be, it's showing people up for the people that they are. And so this isn't a story about the death threats that this journalist received, though that is serious. It's just about the mental health around gambling, the risk reward of gambling, and all these difficult, complicated things around the endorphin, serotonin, all of these things around gambling addiction, and the difficulties of people online being allowed to gamble on anything in the digital thing. And that is such a complicated issue, because I think fundamentally people should be given their personal liberties and personal freedom, so should be allowed to do so. But the risk of gambling becoming this secret killer, secret illness, secret addiction is so severe that people much more expert than me on this issue have really complicated and nuanced views on all sides of it. So in answer to your direct question, I don't think I'm going to give anyone a death threat. So that's really clear answer of it would be impossible. There you go. There is an answer to that one. But I think on Polymarket, I think we should probably spend some time speaking about it, because it's both a tech story and a human story. Is it just good capitalism? Is it a good business model? It seems to be able to predict a lot of things around, a lot of bets were put on the exact date and time of the Iran strikes just before they happened, which must be some really good predictions from people who definitely didn't know anything about it. So it's become a good indicator of what the public thinks, more so than opinion polls, more so than focus groups. So actually, I'm babbling. It's complicated. It's incredibly complicated, and it's just a fascinating thing around what interventions do the market need to have to make this thing safe, and if there is no way of making it safe, is that a thing that should be banned, regulated more comprehensively? It's complicated.
Well, regulators are breathing down the necks and politicians are breathing down the necks of those prediction markets. So Kalshi, which is a similar sort of product to Polymarket, they have been alleged by the Arizona Attorney General just this week to effectively running an illegal gambling operation, taking bets on the outcome of elections within that state. Now, Kalshi, for its part, says that is not true, that they are absolutely fine in what they are doing. They point out that any state can file criminal charges in theory, but actually in practice, if they want to try and regulate a national financial exchange, then it becomes incredibly difficult. But at the same time as that is happening, and that is kind of a big upping of the stakes, and I know that we're generally a UK tech podcast, but I think it's important because actually these sorts of things affect all of us. At the same time, you've got a couple of US politicians that to ban wagering on things like acts of war, where actually you might have someone who does know the outcome and decides to try and make a load of moolah as a result.
Yeah, but that's already illegal. So there is no reason to regulate for these things because it's paying lip service to everything that's already thoroughly illegal. Insider trading. It's just a modified version of that. And if you want to put it in slightly different language to make sure it's crystal clear to everybody, fine. But it's the same thing if you're and even in betting markets. And if you are betting on things that you have prior knowledge of it is a breach of the law. I think it becomes complicated because the house always wins. But ultimately, all of those things are already illegal, and there is no further regulation that's needed around that. It's then more a case of, do you want people to be betting on wars, betting on things that cost people lives, betting on things that are horrific? And what is your ethical response to that reality? It's a question of morality rather than legality, and that's a very difficult, nuanced issue. But the law itself is, if you do insider trading, that's against the law. It's not a complicated or difficult thing to rationalize that. If you look at the betting markets and already around sports betting, particularly people who are familiar with the matter, or people who want to do match fixing in cricket, for example, like betting on really niche leagues, there are automated processes in place. They spot it really quickly, and because it's in their interest to catch them all, anyone committing fraud on these markets or anyone doing insider trading is caught really quickly.
We hope, but sometimes maybe not.
Again, complicated issue. If you're taking advantage of a system, so like if you're card counting in blackjack, it's not against the law, and you're just making sure that you are mathematically advantaged against the house, and none of that is illegal. It just means that the house risks losing money, and so the moment that they spot a card counter, they ease them back, and that means that they are very heavily nudged to stop playing in those casinos. Essentially, they become banned and then they can't cash out. But it's more a case of the house has to always win, or else you're not allowed to play. And then there are stories of people who became very expert at gambling on horses. Again, they were banned from those betting conversations. The house will always win. This is something entirely different about the ethics and the morality of what's happening alongside the insider trading and the illegality of that.
A whole load of things that are interesting that we should explore in a future episode, including how you use bots to kind of arbitrage that sort of stuff. But that's another time.
And now our shortest ever episode, which is already so long, we've come to the end of. So, Crash This and Everything Popular is Wrong production. Follow us on all the favourite podcast platforms. The title on social platforms. The title music is from Nuffer. Check them out on all the streamers. We're hosted by Acast, assisted by Riverside Studios, and we are published every Thursday morning. Get in touch if you want to continue the conversation on China. It has been fascinating, the level of experience that we've sort of seen and discussed. You can find me at Alex Hudson on TikTok, Instagram, wherever the hell you want. Follow Chris on X at Stokel, and all of his links are there. If you want to support the podcast, go to crash.substack.com or search for Crash Podcast on Substack or Google or DuckDuckGo, and we'll be back next week.